Becky, I didn't say hi to you because we've already had numerous conversations today and you're probably tired of talking to me, okay?
Never, Roger. I'm glad I could just be your handwriting decipherer.
I think I should mention to Katura what I told you today. Maybe I'll hold back on that. I'll mention that to her some other time. I'll keep her in suspense.
Roger, we are live streaming, just so you're aware.
Okay.
All right. So I will call the Capital Planning Committee School Research Subcommittee to order, and I will read our opening statement pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting, the Southborough Capital Planning Committee School Research Subcommittee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information, the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording transcript or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. With that, I'll turn it to you, Roger.
So given the same caveats that you have just described, Jason, I'll call the Capital Planning Subcommittee meeting of the Southborough School Committee to order. And it's Katura Martin and myself, Roger Challoner, in attendance. And this is starting at 7:06 p.m.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Roger, for making yourself available. I know I had a conversation with Greg, Becky, earlier this week that kind of was the genesis of making this a joint meeting as opposed to just our standing meetings that we've been holding every other Thursday. What I'm going to do is, because we don't have the meeting minutes for November 5th available, I'm going to skip right to standing updates and maybe Greg, pass it to you and your team. Just update on some of the conversations you've had across the board, and then we can kind of see what the appetite is of the two committees of how to advance the discussion and where we want to go based on what you've learned since our last meeting.
Sure. So one of the action items from our last meeting was to contact MSBA and get some further details around building projects in general, and also closing, what's the process of closing a building and how does that impact an overall project? So we did have a conference call with MSBA. The first thing that they did is they confirmed that the Bulletin 0701, school closing, sales, leases, or other removal from service, is the most updated and current document, even though it has drafts stamped all over it and it's from 2007. That is still pertinent to districts who are considering this. The conversations we had with MSBA was really first to discuss kind of the window when statements of interest would be opening for this upcoming process. And they did confirm that it would be open this winter, either midwinter or late winter. And we also discussed potential scenarios with MSBA. If we did this with a building, then what? And basically, we found out that they do not do scenarios, that they basically said that if we wanted to write a letter to them stating what the overall project scope and ideas and thinking would be, they'd be happy to answer. But again, I think we tried to talk about a number of scenarios that basically they had no interest in entertaining. And basically they said that the process is the process, and that again, if we wanted more information, we could draft a letter and submit it to MSBA. Keith, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's very, very clearly stated, Greg. It was clear that scenario building wasn't something that they would unpack for us. Instead, we would have to come in with a pretty clear proposal on what we'd like, and then they weigh in on what that proposal would be.
So I will share that, the MGL around what would be ineligible for grant applications. I think it's page 2 of the document. And it's the third paragraph on page 2 of MSBA's document, does speak to whether a new facility is replacing a facility removed from service. And it can't create, a closing of a facility can't create a contemporaneous or foreseeable need for a new facility or even new construction. And that is something that MSBA did speak about on their call. And they also discussed, they really frown upon, they don't like it. They don't like when school buildings have to be closed. That was just a general statement that the gentleman made. And he did reference that third paragraph.
Roger, let's explain to Roger and Rebecca what our issue is. What we were concerned about is, first of all, that document was 13 years old and said draft. But putting that aside, we were concerned about the impact of being able to receive a grant if the decision was made to close Woodward. We know that we need to spend money on Neary, even if Neary doesn't, even if the schools stay open, we still know Neary needs work, right? And so we wanted to make sure that closing Woodward wouldn't prevent us from applying for a grant to do whatever needs to be done to Neary.
I understand. Could I ask 2 questions? Actually, might help bring folks up to speed on what I do understand. I have had some conversation with Greg about this, so I'm not entering this meeting blind. Greg, when you talk about, or I guess it was either Keith or Greg, we talk about MSBA saying we don't discuss scenarios. I guess I'm going to say that's another way of saying we don't deal with what ifs. They don't care about the what if. They just want to know about the what. What do you plan to do? Justify it and go forward. So probably answered my own question on that. So when they talk about, or Greg, when you talk about the fact that they look unfavorably on closing a school, then since we're talking about, we're repurposing the school potentially. I mean, obviously there's a lot of time in front of us to determine whether we shouldn't, what we're going to do, but that's this, in their mind, that's the same as closing a school. In other words, closing it for educational purposes to then use it for something else.
Yeah, so any decommissioning of a school building, basically. So that's
as a school. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I can't say that I'm any more comforted after what Greg said than I was at the last meeting. It sounds like this really might be an issue to expect to receive a grant for Neary if we closed Woodward. So Greg, do you think that if we wrote a letter specifically asking them about that scenario, it sounds like they actually would answer it if you asked them a specific question?
I was not confident of exactly what we would write a letter about in terms of, because it would be a scenario.
Right.
I'm hesitant around documenting anything just because it would be a scenario. So I wasn't clear, Kathy, exactly what that letter how it would impact, other than we maybe get a more formal answer from MSBA. So I'm not sure what that means.
Can I ask a question, Kathy?
Of course.
Well, I wasn't sure if if you wanted to sort of respond to Greg. So Greg, is this potentially even worse than at least I think it is, in that in the brief conversation you and I had the other day, we talked about the fact that, well, we talked about the possibility that if we went to MSBA with a project, effectively replace NERI. It's old, et cetera, that there's the possibility that they would come back and say, well, wait, you've got a newer school there in Woodward. And rather than spend all the money that it might take to replace NERI, maybe it would cost less money to upgrade Woodward because it's much newer, and use that instead. I mean, I don't know how involved they get in, kind of the details of the town's plans.
Yeah, I think so. That is accurate, Roger. A decommissioning of a school can't create another project, another construction project or renovation project. So I think the way I interpreted it, and Keith, feel free to weigh in, is that if we were to decommission Woodward, in MSBA's mind, Woodward is an amazing facility. Why would we decommission Woodward? Potentially we could decommission NERI School and then move into Woodward. So again, looking at the scenarios and the benefits, so Keith, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
No, I would definitely agree that that's exactly what I heard from them. In fact, we actually asked them that question twice just to make sure we had it correct. So I would agree with Greg that was my summation as well from his comments.
Can I just flip that? Sorry, Greg, before you go on to the next thing, flip that scenario. We couldn't, what I'm also hearing though, is if the town decided we're just going to close NERI, not invest in the capital, we also couldn't then go add on to Woodward, not that I think there's a lot of space, but we can cross that bridge when it came, or to Finn to accommodate those students, right? Like it would be the same thing. They wouldn't fund a renovation or expansion project either. Is that where you're coming out as well?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, and that's why I think the next important data set is really that enrollment study to see, again, what the 10-year projections are, and if, answer the question that, we started our first meeting with, is can we condense into 3 buildings and still offer our educational programs that we would like to offer for now and in the future?
So if I might, and I guess through the chair, I'd like to follow on to Jason's comment or question, and probably partially because I'm not sure I quite understand that the issue is, if we close NERI, we couldn't get funding. And by the way, not that this would be not that it would be our first choice. I think there's at least a lot of thinking. I'm only going to speak for myself and what I've heard from some folks that says an ultimate plan for Southborough would be a new school at NERI, and again, presuming we can close a school. I mean, we don't even know that for sure, but if we could, a new school for NERI and using Woodward for town office, et cetera, the geography is good. But if we basically couldn't get any funding to do that, and we were left with, we still have to close NERI, and potentially, again, if capacity allowed us to close NERI and pick up capacity either in Woodward or in Finn or both, that wouldn't be fundable through MSBA because it involves closing a school, decommissioning a school?
Yeah, I think MSBA would look at the context of the district. So if we close the school, we talked about grade configuration. So let's say, let's say fourth and fifth grade went to Woodward, second grade moved to Finn. So
Right.
again, you're taking 2 grade levels and putting them 1 grade level each, at each school, one at Woodward and one at Finn. And if you could do that and still maintain your educational program for the foreseeable future for that 10 years, then that would be a viable option. And that's part of the feasibility study that MSBA has you work through.
A viable option that the town should pursue, and not one that would get funding from MSBA to deal with new facilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something, Jason and Kathy, we talked, Jason, I think you talked about that along the tour with Keith. I think we started talking, what are all the viable options? It's not just looking at Woodward for this purpose or Neary for this purpose. It's looking at the context of the larger campus and to see how the educational programming and the grade spans could fit with what we have.
I don't think we have a lot of choices here. I believe your choice is we think that our choice is to close either Neary or Woodward if a school gets closed, and then either move 1 grade to Finn and have 3 grades in the remaining school, or put 4 grades in the remaining school and not touch Finn. Roger, Greg has stated that he does not believe that moving a grade to Trotter is viable. In 2013, that actually was one of the choices. So for now, I'm assuming that everybody agrees that, I'm not the education person on this, neither is Jason. So we're looking at the education people. If you don't think moving to Trotter is viable, then that's off the table. So there's not that many choices. But what we give up here, it sounds like we're going to give up the substantial reimbursement from the state if we do this any way we do it. If we close Neary and let the town use Neary for something else, then the town's going to fund whatever it does there for construction completely. There's going to be no help from the state. If we close Woodward and know that we've got to spend money on Neary, then we're not going to get help there either. It doesn't sound like, because we closed a school. So I think this is really important. It's not like the grant is small. It's a big percentage of the construction cost. It's not 5%, 10%, it's 37%. So I think this is really significant as far as how we look at this.
Greg, can you elaborate, because I don't think I would do it justice, on what else they were looking for from the town side? Because I think that's also important on the capital plan, like on what they were also going to be looking for from the town, irregardless of what we've heard to date.
Yeah, so one of so I talked about the scenario, of, looking at the larger context of the town and the capital projects and the needs of the town in relationship to a school building project. And we asked if they took that into consideration in terms of a project proposal. And they said they would need to see a plan that basically said, if we built a town hall that met all of the functions that the town is trying to accomplish, and it's $40 million for the town to build out, they would compare that to a project like decommissioning Neary School, for example. They need that in the larger context of looking at the school building project, basically.
So to be clear, Greg, are you saying that if the town had a real compelling need for either a whole new building or else a used building, that they would take into account the difference in the cost of those two projects as far as deciding whether they would consider a grant to rehab Neary?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were running scenarios by them without trying to go too deeply into. So we didn't talk about our school buildings. We just talked about just again a scenario. So the thing I don't know is I didn't put Woodward in that scenario. I didn't talk about the ages of Woodward, and I didn't talk about Neary. So there was really no context. But that is what they shared. I would imagine they would think that if we were decommissioning a building, that it probably is a building that needs some work. I would imagine that would be an assumption that they have, but I don't know. I think the next step, I did some thinking about this today, and Becky, I'd love your input on this, is that I believe we use Colliers for the Lincoln building project in Northborough, and they are a full design build firm, and they have a tremendous amount of experience working with MSBA, designing and building and doing master planning. My recommendation is that Keith, Becky, and I reach out to Colliers and just kind of get their expertise and their ideas, because they run into these scenarios, I'm sure, all over the Commonwealth and other states as well. They might be able to give us more detailed information about the process and what MSBA has or has not funded than MSBA would.
Do we also think we still should send the letter? Is there any downside to trying to get them to respond to a letter with a specific scenario on it?
I think we should talk to Colliers first.
They might be able to get us a recommendation on whether that's a worthwhile thing to do, perhaps. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, they have experience in the field, and they can draw on that experience and other scenarios that maybe they've heard about from some of their colleagues. So I think that's a great idea.
I have another question. Have we considered, not that it would be our first choice, I mean, I guess I don't really know what everybody's first choice is, but maintaining Woodward. So if we maintain Woodward as a school, we know that Neary, it needs to be replaced, renovated. You know, there's some serious issues with operating a school that old. And it's time. If we went with a proposal to MSBA to replace, renovate that school, not decommission Woodward, what do you think the potential outcome of that would be?
I think it simplifies the overall scope of the project, because again, it removes decommissioning any building and repurposing a building. It's a very straightforward process. You know, it's a statement of interest. But again, that I think that is an option for the school committee to consider. You know,
And I think it's a viable option, Roger. You know, if you watched our meetings heretofore, and so Greg and Keith, feel free to say, no, there's more than that. The only compelling reason I think that has been stated so far to reduce the number of schools is that the educational experience might be better because you would have one less transition. You transitioned, 3 times or twice instead of 3 times. We're not going to save money closing a school, and so that's just not the reason you do it. The operating costs are the same. You may save maybe a principal, a little bit of admin in the office, but that's about it. So this is not a money saver. This is whether this makes sense because there's a good educational reason, and or the town really has a great reason to use that extra building.
yeah, I mean, I think programmatically, I think, there is merit in reducing the number of transitions students have. And again, consolidating buildings accomplishes that goal. But that doesn't preclude us from having an outstanding educational program as we do with 2 transitions for kids. But it would be nice to have one less transition.
But is it worth doing this? Is that enough of a reason alone to do this?
I mean, I think it's transitioning for students. It's coherent in terms of conversations, the curriculum and instruction. You have more grade spans working at that coherence and alignment of curriculum. You get to know students better over a 3-year period versus 2-year period. So there's a lot of pros. You get to know families better. There's a lot of merit into that, Kathy.
And it doesn't mean that in Roger's scenario that, Kathy, you said, that there may be some savings in operating costs. I mean, that's assuming the town actually wants that building, right? If the building was just closed and raised, then there's significant savings, at least on the school side, because obviously you're taking all the old mechanicals, no capital needs, right? Then it would be incumbent upon the town, if you didn't want that building, but you still have needs, what are the costs of those needs, right? And how do those play out over that 10, 20-year time frame, both from an annual operating plus a capital, and how does that compare to just taking a building that's already there, which sometimes isn't actually the cheaper answer, as we know from some of our recent projects.
Jason, I sincerely hope that what I was describing never gets looked at as Roger's scenario. So just want to be on record with that.
Well, Roger, and all of our, in respect to your question, what we are trying to do though is put the scenario, all of the scenarios out there,
I understand.
right? And I think we all know that there are some that make a lot more sense than others, but I think what at least Kathy Couture and myself have agreed to as part of our subcommittee is we don't want to be naive and pass over something just because it wasn't what was like initially on the table. So we are trying to, and obviously we will have, I'll call it a curveball, right? But there will probably be 4 other curveballs that get thrown at us before we know what will go in any statement of interest someday, what will go before town meeting, and what will, be well vetted before anyone does anything by a lot of committees other than just those that are sitting here tonight.
I clearly understand.
Yeah.
So let's talk about too whether the need on the town side would be compelling enough to convince MSBA about the grant. We're not going to build a new town. There's no plan on the table to build a new townhouse. So what we would do with, let's again assume Neary is rehabbed and Woodward is turned into a town building. We know of some things we could do with that building, but I'm not sure how compelling they are. So when the rest of the town hears this and starts throwing other stuff at us as far as, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? I'm not sure how compelling either of these cases are. That's why I, go back to Greg is, I'm sure it sounds like if you'd had your druthers and you were trying to design this from scratch, you would have designed with 3 schools, which we used to have 3 schools. So you'd rather have 3 than 4, but we've got 4. So is it worth getting rid of a school? Is there enough educational benefit to really make this compelling as far as explaining to the town why we might close a relatively new building if we took the Neary route for the school and not the Woodward route? So I'd say the curveball we've heard tonight is a pretty big curveball too. Let's say it costs, I don't know, $5 million to rehab Neary, to $10 million. 37% is a lot of money of that range of cost. So I don't know.
I mean, I would share that the feedback we do hear from families, although it's one group of stakeholders, not all of them, that transition is significant. That additional transition for students is significant. I think from a school age, from families with school age children, it's a compelling reason. But from a senior perspective, from a taxpayer without children in the school, I'm not sure it's going to be that compelling. unless you can make the argument that they're going to get value out of, Woodward in some way, whether it's enhanced senior citizens functions or the gymnasium, whatever the features would be.
When you talk to Colliers, that's who you said it was going to be?
Yep.
Would they be able to give you like a range of if you were to redo, if you took Neary as the example and you just said, if we just were to build the same exact square footage, what's like the going, I assume they would be able to give you a range, right? Like, because I guess what I'm trying to think about in my head, and I never would give up free money, is like, and I'm not endorsing this, just before I ask the question. Has anyone built a school without MSBA reimbursement in the state before?
I'm not sure. It's a great question. I'm sure they have.
I suspect they have.
I'm thinking, I think
So that might be what we're looking at. Does anyone disagree that if Neary is kept as a building, whether a school or town, we're going to spend some money on it? We don't have a choice. The only way we're not going to spend money is we literally mothball it and sell it. So there's going to be money spent on that school, one way or another.
Well, let me flip that to Roger and Katura. If we weren't having these conversations, this subcommittee was never formed. Am I correct with the following statement? The school committee likely would have voted to advance over $2 million of capital related to Neary for the town to consider at the town meeting 4+ months from now, depending on when it actually gets held.
I have a thought. Katura, you've been, we haven't heard much from you. So do you want to jump in first on that? On what your thinking is? We have had no discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking I'm thinking about our capital plan. I think 2 million is high for 5 months from now. I would say over the next few years, though, yes. I mean, because if you look at the plan, there are these massive projects that need to be done. So I don't know that there was. What did you say, Jason? 2 million?
I was thinking the roof. I don't pull up the exact numbers that were being held in the plan, but I was focused on the roof, and I believe it was the parking lot. I see Greg nodding his head.
The roof, the parking lot, and the windows. I think, or maybe the Neary windows are fine. I can't remember, but there was I don't know that it added up to that, but yes, I think that also would be done in conjunction with an MSBA application. And so we wouldn't be asking for that next year. We'd be applying this year and hopefully get in, and then be asking for it a year from the spring. So
that's fine. We're just trying to talk about what you would spend on that school if you kept the grades the way they are now.
So let me revise it to the next 1 to 2 town meetings. In the next 1 to 2 fiscal years, it sounds like.
So we did.
I think getting up there. Yeah.
We did submit a statement of interest for Trotter, Neary, and the Finn roof. The Neary statement of interest was accepted into MSBA's accelerated repair project. So we were accepted to enter into studying the Neary roof. It doesn't mean they would have funded it. And we withdrew our application because of this discussion and this work.
Jason, to follow on, I guess, to both Katura and Greg, certainly the answer to your question in general, as Katura identified, without considering what we're considering as far as the Woodward issue, et cetera, we would definitely be advancing requests for some capital improvements for Neary. As a matter of fact, we specifically, and this is just at the last public meeting we had as a board, we moved some things out of this year. I think the only thing we left on was the parking lot, because that's just, that's just got to be dealt with. But we moved everything else back in consideration for maybe trying to do this a smarter way, economically more sensible way than to try to piecemeal this thing. Now, again, whether it's 2 million or not, in the next meeting or the next two meetings, clearly the facility, right, is going to need capital over the next several years. So there is absolutely no doubt that the implication of your question, the answer to it is absolutely yes.
Do you guys know what that capital looks like? Is there an overall plan as far as what you would do, or have you just kind of started with what you have to do right now and know that you've got more things you need to do?
Keith, do you want to talk about the capital plan?
Yes, I can answer that, Kathy. I think we, when we were discussing the plan, we did consider the conversation we're having right now, but we did identify the roof at Neary, the roof at Trottier to be a top priority, as well as the roof at Finn. Coupled with that is the paving of every school but Woodward again. And then forecasting out, there are some larger ticket items that are coming up down the road for some of the schools, and whether it be updates to energy management systems and things of that nature. But I would say if we are looking at the top priority items, they would, mostly be the Neary roof and the Neary parking lot. Those are two of the top priorities, I would say, from the capital plan.
So no one's actually gone into Neary and kind of done this is what you really need to do to get to school, so it's going to last another 30 years?
So there is Keith, if I'm correct, in 2020, I don't have the plan in front of me. So 2026, a feasibility study.
Correct. Yes.
So there is
2025, Greg, sorry.
2025, a feasibility study for Neary. And then 2026 is a significant project to really modernize Neary School. Is that correct, Keith?
It's slightly off. I think we were hoping to move forward with a feasibility study in FY23 and then look for a renovation project in FY25.
And the roof would have to be done before that, or you would hold the roof and go?
We would hold the roof in conjunction with that feasibility study.
Okay.
The reason that this study we're doing, as far as whether you could close a school if you chose to, based on demographic projections, needs to be done no matter what, is because when you start talking about spending a lot of money on Neary, that question is going to get asked. And so it's got to be answered. We've got to say, we looked at this. This is, why we chose to keep Neary open, renovate it, and keep Woodward open, or not. But we looked at it because that will get asked when we start asking the town for a lot of money for Neary.
And also, we also know that, the school committee, the conversations we've had at the capital planning subcommittee and at the school committee levels, that these projects need to follow the timeline of town projects. It's not just we're going to look at Neary. It's where does this fit into all the other projects that the town is hoping to accomplish over the next 10 to 15 years.
And the towns are the committee that Jason chairs, the overall capital planning committee, of which this is a subcommittee, or R3 is trying valiantly to put together a really good 10-year plan that gets updated every year for the next year. And this certainly would be important to incorporate this one way or another as far as where we're going to go with these schools.
I guess for me, my recommendation to this committee is the two most important next steps. One is NESDEC, waiting for that data, because that's just, we're really talking about scenarios. Until we get that data, I think, it's just a lot of conversations and what ifs. And then the second is the conversation with Colliers, and Jason or Kathy, one of you, I think, should be on that call. So you can get an understanding of, because I mean, again, I'm not the expert in all things decommissioning and closing and building. We need someone who has experience in this field, and this is what they do for work, who can answer our questions.
I'm happy to join you unless Kathy wants to.
Jason, go ahead.
All right.
So Greg and Keith and possibly Rebecca and possibly Katura, maybe Roger too. When MSBA approves a grant, I've got 37% in my head. Is that not necessarily always true for a building? Is it variable? Does it go up and down? Is 37 our number?
It's based on the community, and that's the community's reimbursement rate, right, Becky?
That's correct. Yeah.
So 37% is Southborough's reimbursement rate.
Correct.
it would be-
36.89 to be exact.
What is it, Rebecca? 3789?
But you're telling us Northborough has a different number, for example.
And
Yeah.
is theirs higher?
Theirs is, their reimbursement rate is higher. Or was higher.
Is that based on demographics of the town?
Correct. Overall wealth factor, demographics.
Yeah, demographics, including overall wealth, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's, one of the significant things that drives these reimbursement ratios, even as I think we're familiar with for the town.
Mhm.
So Jason, I don't want to get off the agenda, but let me just ask one more question to Roger. Roger, if the study that's underway right now comes back and it looks like we've got room to move 2 grades elsewhere, right? And one of the 2 permutations I think we have. What is the school committee going to do with that information? What is the school committee going to look at to determine whether they are going to support doing that, moving either 1 grade to Fenn or putting 4 grades in the surviving school?
I'm
Do you know yet?
gonna partially duck the question, even though it was you directed it at me, and have Greg, I guess, maybe stand in for trying to answer that now. I think it's going to depend. So first of all, it'll depend on what the study says, and based on what the study says, we're certainly going to look to the administration to say, all right, now based on, because if it's a lot bigger or a lot smaller, you can end up with different scenarios, different things that would make sense as the right thing to do, and there probably isn't necessarily one right thing to do based on different results of that study. So we'd look to administration to say, all right, based on these numbers, from an educational standpoint, tell us, what your thinking is on this, so that we can at least try to make an informed decision. So I don't know if you have anything that you can say now about that, Greg, or not.
No, I mean, I think it's part of the feasibility, right? So once we have the data, then it's looking at all, I mean, I think if you're doing any project, it's looking at what are all the options on the table, reconfiguring, grade spans, closing a school, renovating an area. I think all of these are part of a larger study that would need to be done. And part of this is also the statement of interest. And then once you're invited in with the statement of interest, all of these scenarios are actually taken under consideration by MSBA.
So Greg, I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but I am trying to pinpoint this a little bit more.
Yes.
Because Roger, in 2013, the conclusion study was we could close a school, but the school committee decided not to do that. So I'm trying to roll forward a little bit. So let's say the demographic study is clear. We've got room to take those 2 grades and either put 1 with Fenn and 1 with the surviving school, or put the 2 with the surviving school. It's clear we could do it. Either way, we're not saying which school, we're not saying which way we go, but we definitely could do that. And then we decide later which specific choice we make. What is the school committee going to ask you to do to make a case that we should do it. So so far we've gotten, and it sounds like this is major, that you would significantly reduce the transition between schools by doing this, but you've got one less, and that's a big, big deal. And there's other things around that. Is that where you would focus, is trying to explain to the school committee that piece of it? Or is there something else you're going to bring in to try to, that you believe is really part of this decision that should be thought about?
Can I just jump in for a second? So I think that Kathy, on that, and I don't want to preempt anyone else's comment, but the way I think about that is, in a way, as far as that analysis goes at this point in time, because now we're several years on from the last study, so I don't think we can totally just rely on what they looked at that time. I think we don't know what we don't know right now. And I think it's really hard to think about what exact questions are we going to be asking when we don't have the study back yet, because the enrollment data or the projections are going to give us sort of a direction to think about it. And so, maybe it'll come back saying we expect the population to, the enrollment to precipitously drop. Right. And so then, then we go down one path and we have a whole set of questions to ask. If we, maybe it'll come back and say, we expect it, you're going to have a boom like all the other towns around you. And, and then that kind of gives us a whole different direction, which is different from where we started with this subcommittee. So I think in some ways we don't totally, I think that the general categories of things, as Greg said, and Roger, academic impact, grade bands together, all those things. But I think that once we have a direction, we'll have a whole set of additional things that we'll want to consider and questions to ask. I don't know if that sounds right to Greg and Roger too, but that's kind of how I think about it. It's kind of like we just don't know what direction we're going in yet, and once we know it, then we'll know what we need to find out.
I think this is where Colliers will come in, because through that process, and this, in my initial thinking, is that we should submit a statement of interest for NERI. A statement of interest does nothing other than put our proposal of the deficiencies of what we think the deficiencies of NERI are. And if we get invited into the process, it then does a study of all of our facilities, the deficiencies, the larger context, the master plan of the district, and uses that information to decide a path forward. That's what I predict Colliers will say. So
do you think they won't say, write the letter and ask them for sure whether we would lose reimbursement for a NERI rehab if we close Woodward? You think
No, because
they go ahead with the statement of interest and let's see what comes back?
Yeah, because I think the part of the invitation into the process, the 270-day process, will yield those conversations. We'll have conversations around, do you, because being invited does not mean that the project is approved. It means that you're going to study it, and you're going to get a building committee together and study every option that you have. The result could be decommissioning a school. And then when a committee decommissions a school, then the town decides, okay, what are we going to do with this facility? And that's a whole nother process that starts. And it could be, okay, let's use it for the town hall.
So let me just play that out. So Greg, first of all, you outlined two options of what you thought next steps were, and I don't think any one of us reacted. Yeah. We just kept asking you questions. So I'll go on record as saying I think those are absolutely appropriate next steps. I think you've already outlined waiting for the NASDAQ report. I am as eager as anyone to go 100 steps forward, as you all know, with how I operate. But I do think those are the appropriate two next steps. But I have two questions coming out of what you just said. Number one, you think if we did a statement of interest in this example, and then they invite us in, we form this building committee, et cetera, there still is a conceivable outcome potentially where they say, you know what, decommission a school because of something you write in the educational impact. I know you're not guaranteeing that, but you're still saying that's a possibility.
Yeah, because it's just like, it's, even though we're invited in, the statement of interest is accepted and we're invited in, that has no commitment from MSBA to Southborough about funding any project. All it's saying is that the statement of interest has some merit and that it's allowing you to study it. And they will help you go through that process to study it and determine what are the next best steps for the school district.
Obviously at a cost to the town.
So it would be the fees, yes.
Okay. So then my next question, I don't know who, and no one's gonna have the answer tonight, but like, I don't know which party in these follow-up conversations you're gonna have answers it, is the town has the ability to build a new NERI. We build a new NERI, it's funded by MSBA. We don't go down my other theory for a second. What does that bind us to in terms of the ability longer term to close? Let's just say NESDEC's enrollment study is wrong and the population of Southborough from school age children plummets. How do you answer that question? I'm not expecting an answer tonight, but like, I don't know who the right person to refer that to is like, even if they don't recommend decommissioning a property or building now, if we get to a point down the road where the school committees look in saying, we really don't need this amount of space, we don't need this building, or this building now needs a lot of repair itself, and it's beyond, like, what limitations would we have if we accept funding for a new NERI, if we make it all the way through an MSBA process?
You couldn't, a NERI would have to, until the bond's paid off.
That
So-
part I got. Yeah.
He's talking about closing Woodward.
Yep.
So.
Or Finn, let's just leave Finn out there too.
A school.
So the question is, and this is a question for Colliers, is if you submitted a statement of interest for NERI school and it was grades 4 and 5, you know, how specific the statement of interest is, and then you built out the project and then all of a sudden a year later you're trying to move grades 2 and 3 and that wasn't part of your proposal that you submitted, I think there would be an issue around that.
And the
I'm
issue
saying
would be.
I'm saying 7 years down the road,
Yeah.
grades 4 and 5 are in there. The enrollment was trending fine, and all of a sudden it plummets for some reason that
You could decommission any building the town owns, and it would be.
But we don't know if that would endanger the MSBA reimbursement on NERI that we received 7 years before that. To me, that's the question there.
But let me ask, but Kathy, don't you get the MSBA reimbursement up front now as opposed to over the life of the bond?
Correct.
We don't, yes,
Yep.
we get the whole thing up front because right now we're not.
For what?
Okay, all right, well, that's a different story. I didn't know that.
Say that again, Roger. Did you have a question?
Well, no, when Kathy said, right now we're not, I was asking for what? Is she potentially thinking about incorrectly about a school funding, or is that a different project being
I
funded?
think it changed. I think the process changed. Do you want to go, Becky?
Yeah, so what will happen with the Finn boiler, for example, is once the project is complete and all of the invoices are in, MSBA will do an audit of the project. And from there, that's when the grant rate, like the actual grant amount, will be determined. And then it will be reimbursed to the town
In
at that
full,
point.
in
So
full.
in full. So
Okay,
it can
does that
take a
apply
few.
to a school?
Yes.
Because Roger, we're still getting the reimbursement for, Woodward, Trottier, Finn.
I understand.
And that was given to us over the length of the bond. So even though it's bonded over 20 years, they would give us the payment up front, so we would have a smaller bond.
Right.
Right.
However, as I understood, the as I understand what's happening, and I think just consistent with, is that funding process has changed, correct?
That is accurate.
Yes.
Sounds like it. Well, that's interesting because that actually would help. Because if you've got the money and you're not waiting for reimbursements, then you would think it'd be hard for them to get it back.
So Jason, you could do something with Woodward in that scenario, where 7 years down the road, population changes and you no longer need that building. You could decommission that school. It's a town-owned property.
So people keep mentioning 7 years, by the way. Is there something magic about 7, or could that be plus or minus, or we're just using that as an example?
That's where the data got really bad. I don't know. I'll tell you, this is why I was using 7. It could be total coincidence. That's where the data got really bad in the last, I'll call it high level NASDAQ study. Is once you got about 7 years out, it was meaningfully different.
Now, it also since Kathy referred to the 2013 situation, that was 7 years ago. So there's a lot of sevens here that I'm trying to connect the dots with.
I mean, I guess I will share that, I am out of my depth of knowledge with all these scenarios. And I think all of the scenarios we discussed are potential. I can't definitively say yes or no. And that's where I think the Colliers folks will be able to give us some real expertise in this. The other thing is, Keith did reach out to Shrewsbury Public Schools. And one of the key messages they shared with us, and which I've heard before, is, you might have to submit statements of interests over and over again. So it's good to get into the queue because they might deny it this year, but maybe it's 3 years out. So there's some persistence that is important as we look at this process.
And that's similar advice that we received for the accelerated program for the roofs as well, right, Greg? Like when Jim Joliker was doing that work and getting organized around it, it was about the consistency of keeping yourself in the queue.
And I think we shouldn't be naive. It could actually work the other way around too, right? Is that
Maybe.
Given where we're at from an infrastructure perspective, I don't think we can be naive. It would be nice to at least be lined up, should additional funding appear that's from outside the state, especially.
Yeah, if we submit a statement of interest, we have to be prepared for getting invited in and what that potential could be.
Jason, is that what you're referring to? Or are you referring to some type of what we've called shovel-ready project in case there's a big infrastructure bill in the federal government?
I was reacting to the comment Keith made based on the feedback we got from Shrewsbury that it could take multiple submissions. But I also was thinking, yes, there could be an infrastructure bill coming from Washington, right? That may put more, or the flip side is of other communities that put a hold on things that have uncertainties far worse than what Southborough has, right? And they have less applicants than typical this year.
Jason, go frozen.
You did.
What happened?
He'll be back.
Jason posted a still picture of himself.
Yeah, it's a good one though.
It is.
I didn't know if it was just me having issues because that's what's been happening all day.
It must be Shrewsboro.
Yeah, you might want to be more. Yeah, you might want to be more creative with your picture, Katura, than the one we're seeing.
You know what? I don't even know how to do a different picture. I could probably figure it out, but
I don't either.
Ask your boys, Katura. I'm sure they can.
exactly.
Really.
So while we wait for Jason to return to us, are the two steps that we talked about, calling Colliers and doing the statement of interest simultaneously? Are we going to wait to talk? We're going to talk to Colliers and then do the statement of interest based on what they say.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation, is to take Collier's lead.
Okay.
Whatever that might be.
Well, we still have a legal meeting. Katurna are here, so we've got a quorum still. So. Let's see if he's trying to text me. I'll text him and see if. All right, I texted him, see if he'll be able to resolve it. My guess is he'll jump on a phone. All right, well, let's at least keep moving here.
So I noticed, just a quick aside, I noticed that in the state statistics that just came out, COVID, that Southborough is now down in the light gray, right? Almost the lowest, second lowest category. Did people see that? Just came out today?
Let me look.
I didn't see.
I haven't seen that. They changed the whole color coding system.
They did, but you've still got, the white, gray, yellow, or green, yellow, red, green.
Right, but what is gray equivalent to on the old system? That's what I always think of. Is that, yellow, really? I don't know.
Well, if you look at the, if you try to map it to the average incidence rate, gray is the lowest, when you look at the numbers that are associated with either red or yellow or even green.
Well, that's good. That's
Yeah,
great.
it is good.
Has the school committee set a threshold that if we were to exceed the positivity rate that everybody else seems to be focused on, we would close schools, or have you not done that?
What we're looking for, Kathy, is in-school transmission. So we're looking for student to student, student to teacher, or teacher to teacher transmission. And that would trigger a closure of a school for a 14-day period.
But Kathy, it's interesting. There's still some data that suggests that if you take a look at the subset of kids that are in school, and in Southborough's case, it's only hybrid because we don't have full in-person, and you just take a look at the percentage of those kids that are testing positive. Now, not testing positive from an in-school transmission, but just testing positive. That percentage, looked at in one way, is actually less than the percentage of kids that are staying at home, which suggests that the health measures that are being followed in school, as far as distancing and masks, et cetera, are actually pretty effective.
We had an excellent presentation at our last school committee meeting last week. Was it last week?
Yeah. Yes.
By Dr. Andrea Ciaranello, who's been consulting with the district, and it was just so great to see the recent information. I would recommend that to anybody. It was right at the beginning of the meeting, and maybe have 20 minutes, half an hour, and it was a really great overview.
That was the most recent one, Katura?
Yes, that was the one on November 9th. It was Monday, November 9th.
It was right at the beginning.
Yeah.
First item.
Roger, I'm trying to find the map, which I always have a difficult time finding.
Well, I cheat. I have the URL up, and the URL is the mass.gov.weekly COVID-19 public health report, and then it's a dash, and it's the name of the month. In this case, it's November dash, and then it's the day of the week, and you got to put a Thursday in. So in this case, it's the 19th, then 2020. And are you looking for the graph, or are you looking for the chart?
I'm looking for the actual map, the heat map.
Oh, I guess, yeah, I guess there's I see the map. It's kind of blue. Now it's not colored. Now it's different shades of blue.
My apologies. Hopefully that makes you feel better, Katura, that we must be on the same internet plan here.
Well, you know what? As long as you apparently didn't go do something stupid to your modem, which made it not work for the rest of the day. So we had to involve Spectrum. I don't even know what's happening right now. So
Jason, we didn't go any further. We were talking about the maps as far as where Southborough is with colors.
Got it. Okay. I was able to log in from I went back to my phone, but long story short is I didn't want to mess up the recording. So I'm glad it's good to know that it didn't stop for the future. So I think I had asked a question or was saying something, and then I heard you say, I can't hear you, Jason. And then you saw me freeze, and that was about it. So I guess at least where I was in my head was, Greg, how long do you think it would take to get Colliers on the phone? Like, you think that's a couple weeks? Is it a month?
Early next week,
Okay.
or Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
I mean, they have a vested interest in partnering with, and moving forward with these types of projects and sharing their information. And we have the district has a prior relationship through the Lincoln Street project in Northborough.
Okay.
And Jason, we're still on target next Monday for the tour at 1:00.
Yeah. And just for everyone's benefit, that's the town's architect to take a walk through both facilities to help make sure the town knows what could or couldn't be done in a hypothetical situation. He's going to walk through Neary and Woodward, because a critical component to all of this is if the town doesn't want one or both of the buildings, that may inform some of the decision making here as well, or the cost to do what the town thinks they want to do with it is preemptive or ballparking what those costs are. So that's the purpose of that, just for Roger, mainly for your benefit, because I don't think you're a part of that discussion.
Correct.
So then it would probably be very important to meet after that Collier discussion, because I think that then charts this, at least I'll speak for the capital planning subcommittee of the town, on the town side, that would chart kind of what we do or don't do while we wait for the NESDEC information. But I think, Kathy, one of the things that I think we could start to, once we start to understand variables, is like, we're going to need, regardless of which way this town goes, right? And given the true partnership that has existed between us and the schools to date, we need to show every scenario we've thought about from a cost perspective too. Like anything that was viably considered. So we should start to kind of make sure we're tracking all of these. And if it is eliminated for an educational reason, that's great. But, maybe there's something that gets eliminated because of a cost consideration, just to show the breadth, and knowing the typical people that will ask questions at a town meeting, the breadth of certain decisions that were made, right? So I go back to hey, if you chose to ignore MSBA and did your own thing, Southborough, this is how much a school approximately costs. This is what you're giving up in terms of the reimbursement. So you better have a really good reason of what you would do with that 37 and change % of how that's a good use of money, right? And what implications does that have, far beyond just cost, but educational, et cetera. So I don't want to get too far down that road tonight, or even another meeting without the Collier discussion of where we think this may go. But I think that's something we should at least just put on our tracker of things to do.
I agree, and I don't think that we can wait till, Keith, you said fiscal year 23 to do your feasibility for Neary. I think one of the scenarios you've got to show the town is, okay, we keep both schools open like they are now, but this is what needs to be spent on Neary to keep it viable for 30 years. So I think that's got to be part of the overall discussion. So we may need to accelerate that feasibility so we know what that would cost.
So to that extent, and Roger and Katura, this is where I need your help. The warrant for the town technically closes early December. Like basically, I think either the first week after Thanksgiving, or even if they chose to extend it to their second meeting in December. But typically, if you have a capital item coming from the school, does your committee vote at least to send a placeholder? like think about Finn boiler last year. Like what's your typical process? Do you send a placeholder and a mark in the BOS?
I mean, the answer would be yes. Typically, that's what would be done.
So
I thought you guys had removed not only the roof, but the parking lot for fiscal year 22. Am I wrong?
Did you say for fiscal year 22 or
Yeah,
two?
the one we're about to, yeah, so fiscal year 22 is, you know, what's coming up.
Well,
So
think
I thought that they had.
That is accurate.
the parking lot's still there, I think. I think we moved everything else.
For the Finn school, the parking lot is still there, Roger.
Well, there's another parking lot still there, right?
Um,
Trottier?
Damn it.
Is it Trottier? I thought there was two parking lots.
It is Trottier and Finn.
Right,
Correct.
Finn and Trottier.
We delayed the others.
Correct.
And part of the reasoning for that was that if we're going to apply for MSBA, that wouldn't be funded or happen until over a year from now anyway.
Correct.
So the other thing is the district has funded many of its smaller capital projects. For example, the reconfiguration of the Woodward driveway through rental, the renting of the central office space, the money for Southborough extended day. So a lot of these projects are funded, and these, I believe the Finn and Trottier project, either one of them would fall under that type of category of funding to accomplish that capital project.
Because to be clear, and Jason, correct me, right now on the capital plan for the town for fiscal year 22, there is no money for anything we just talked about so far.
right. So I guess two requests that I would recommend here. So wearing my capital planning chair hat, to the extent that anything changes on the school side, that either of those projects are going to be general fund expenditures, like that would require a town meeting vote. Technically, capital planning will need to vet those on the town side to make the recommendation. We've made a recommendation, everything else right now, absent financial consideration. So if that changes, you know where to come and we'll get it on the agenda and have the appropriate conversation. But I guess where I was going with my question to Roger procedurally is it certainly seems like we would be naive not to put a placeholder for a NERI feasibility study for FY22. You can always pull it as we get closer to town meeting. What I don't want to have happen is that they close the warrant, we find something out and we figure out some plan forward, and you have no way to access money for a feasibility absent the town holding a special town meeting.
No, I mean, I think we agree with that statement, and because we're talking about for the next town meeting, right? For the town meeting coming up in March.
Theoretically March, yes.
Theoretically March. Yeah, I have a question about that. I guess the date I heard from, I guess it's Tom LaFlamme when we were in a different meeting. What is it, the third Saturday in March or something like that?
March 20th.
20th.
So what do people, so the crystal ball time, what do people think the likelihood is that meeting date will hold at this point in time?
I'll let Kathy answer because she said something in advisory last night. So
Roger, all I can do is give you my personal opinion. I don't think it'll hold. We're not going to be vaccinated, and it's going to have to be indoors at your school auditorium, which you're probably not going to want the town to be in, given what you're doing to try to keep everybody safe. So I think they'll postpone it, and there's no reason not to. You know, we did it in June last year, so they could postpone it easily to May or June. And then maybe at that point, we've got, you know, vaccinations are underway, and it's a lot safer. Or if it's June, we do it outside again. So I personally think they will postpone it, but I imagine that if the same thing happens this year as last year, they're going to wait to the very last minute before they do this.
I understand, and I guess my personal opinion would agree with your personal opinion, but it's not based on any actual knowledge.
No, so I'm just using common sense. That's all. I know nothing.
So I guess, Roger, if it's amenable to you, obviously you need a vote of your committee. I think we should just at least get it on Mark Purple's radar screen that may come as a potential subject to the vote of the school committee as a placeholder. I just don't I'm weary of them closing this warrant without getting the proper things in there. They can always reopen it, but I'd rather be complete unless, Greg, you've submitted something already.
No, so I think the process would be that we would draft our statement of interest. That would be submitted to the MSBA. They would make a decision around whether we were invited into the eligibility period, probably at the earliest April, May, June. At that point, once we're invited into the eligibility period, it'd be FY23 where we'd want to put a warrant for feasibility, because that eligibility period is the 270 days to get to that point. So it wouldn't be fiscal year 22, it would be fiscal year 23.
But how do you pay for all your consultants during that 270 days?
So we would do, hang on.
We're trying to give you some money here, Greg. So why wouldn't you on fiscal year 22 want to put a warrant, it'd be a warrant article, so it'd stay open until you used it. You wouldn't have to use it in fiscal year 22. It'd be open, but it's there ready to go to spend when you're ready to spend it on consultants, feasibility study, et cetera. But I just think understanding what has to be done to NERI as a school is a part of this process we're going to have to identify and compute.
Well, we should certainly put this on the agenda for the next meeting, I think, no doubt.
So it's, so the process is, again, the SOI eligibility period. Once we're Becky, and it's basically a parallel process to the accelerated repair projects. Once you're invited in, at that point you have to demonstrate you have funding to do initial study, Becky, not the entire feasibility.
It's after the eligibility period that you're invited in, and that's when you would do the feasibility. So it's really like the second step in the process. And it's after that 270 days. So really it looks like it's more of like the gathering of paperwork in that 270 days, forming a committee, like a school building committee. And then, it looks like a lot of documentation that you have to submit.
And I think what you're hearing on capital is that doing it too soon could be problematic, but we certainly absolutely appreciate the fact that we don't want to be in a situation where we can't access funding simply because we passed up a placeholder, I mean, so I hear what you're saying, for sure.
Yeah, I think, so Jason, your point, and just so Roger, what you're stating, and Jason, is that there's no harm in having putting a warrant article forth just in case, and it can always be removed.
Yeah, you can always withdraw it. I think that, however, I think people recognize that at this point, if someone asked us to justify that placeholder, we probably couldn't at this point. Now, the assumption is we're going to be able to do that, by the time we get the meeting time.
I don't know, Roger, most of the town, if you say we've got a placeholder with this amount of money to basically start studying what we've got to do to rehab NERI, I don't think there would be much question as to that. Everyone knows how old that school is.
I agree with you. Absolutely agree with you.
The only risk is the feasibility study is, Becky, is that part of the reimbursement?
Right.
So that would be one of the eligible costs that we would be reimbursed for. Yes. Because that would be part of the process, and that's what happened with Finn.
Yeah.
So we had the outlay of money at first, but now we're being reimbursed for that.
So I will defer, Roger, to you, Katura, and the wisdom of the school committee. Speaking for myself as a member of the capital plan, I would obviously support a placeholder until we know more. And it's very clear to me, at least, that we're going to know a lot more by the time we hit March. And I think we're all admitting that March may not actually be when it is. So every month that passes, we're obviously gonna be a lot smarter on this topic and maybe a little more prepared to present something.
Because
Understood.
what you would do parliamentarily, or whatever the right word is there, is get the warrant article on there now, put a number, just make up a number, something that's got, probably 6 figures. And then, once time gets closer and what the amount is better, you can always amend the warrant article at town meeting to change it to a more correct amount. And again, you don't have to spend it. It's just sitting there, set aside to be spent at some point. And if it never gets spent, you close it out.
Am I correct in recalling that once you have a number on a warrant article, it can decrease but can't increase at town meeting? Am I correct about that, or is that not the case in these kinds of things?
Well, you're the board of selectmen, X1. You may be right. I don't remember that, but it does kind of ring a bell. So you may be right.
It may be an operational budget we're talking that I'm recalling, and instead of a capital item. But I know that at least in some situations, you couldn't move it up, but you could move it down.
You definitely can move it down. That's a fact.
I believe we had that situation this year, and I believe the moderator made the call on it because the warrant was posted. We had one situation, I think, where there was a potential for something to go up and it couldn't. And I think there was another situation where the funding was shifting from potential. This was that hook lift truck, Kathy, where it was shifting from general fund to bonding, and it changed the entire situation. And Paul wouldn't let it go. But it was the moderator's call, is my understanding.
Okay. Okay.
Good
So I guess from a school research subcommittee perspective, we had been meeting on every other Thursday night. Obviously, that would take us past Thanksgiving if we chose to keep that structure. We need to meet once we have an update from Collier, and if Greg thinks we can do that next week, great. But even if it slipped into the following week, that timing would seem to work, assuming that time actually still works for the members of that subcommittee. So Katura, Kathy, I don't know if you have a thought on that.
No, I think I think that sounds fine. I'm available whatever Thursday. I'm just thinking, I don't know if Greg probably did remember that next week is Thanksgiving, but I don't know if he said maybe make contact early next week. I don't know what everybody's availability is Thanksgiving week these days, but so if we had to push the next meeting out a week just to give enough time for that, given the holiday, that'd be fine with me too.
So Greg, do you want the 3rd or the 10th?
Let's do the 10th.
Okay. So we'll have one meeting in December, because obviously then that would take us to Christmas Eve if we continued. But if we needed to meet before the Christmas break, we could on an alternate time.
Especially if the NASDAQ report came in.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's going to come in a little bit earlier, like earlier than January 10th.
Okay. So the only other thing I had on the agenda was, Greg, did you have any updates on the NASDAQ study? Any conversations, or they're just doing their data gathering at this point?
No, Keith is the contact. So Keith, they've been reaching out to Keith for contacts, and I believe Keith, you've provided them with all the information that they've requested thus far.
That is correct. I've provided all the information they requested thus far, and I haven't gotten any requests in the last 7 to 10 days.
Okay.
So I don't know what they've done. I don't think this is redundant, but I've got some information to give to them. I've talked in great length to the developer of Park Central, and I have been given permission to talk to our town council to make sure that there is as much of an understanding as there can be as far as legally where that project could go. So I've got to have that phone call. So I will call him. He may, I know he hasn't talked to the developer. He may have already talked to the town council, but I don't think he has. I think I would have been told that because the town council knows I'm about to call him. He knows why. So I will get that done probably tomorrow, and then pass on what I know to them just to make sure they've got as much information as they can about that project.
And then I had school committee feedback because Katura, I know you've had a meeting since then. Is there anything that Kathy and I need to be aware of coming out of your discussion with the school committee?
Nothing new that we haven't already discussed. We did go over the capital plan that the school committee capital planning subcommittee came up with. And that was, I can't remember if we voted on it, but I know it was, well received and is the plan in place right now. And that was about it. So
I think we did vote, Katura.
Yeah,
I do
okay.
believe that was one of the items that we voted.
yeah, so that's official. And nothing else from the school committee perspective at this point.
Okay. And then I had go ahead, Kathy, I started to say something.
It says, Rebecca, the rent that comes in from extended day and from the superintendent's office and whatever else, you guys treat that as a revolving account, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so just to be clear, so Greg, you think there's enough money in that account to fund the paving for both Finn and Trotter? Is that what you're saying?
Not both projects, potentially one project.
But you still want both done in fiscal year 22?
Yeah, so I think we discussed, Becky, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we put them both on the capital plan, but discussed potentially having the funds just do one. And the conversation that we had at the capital planning meeting was which one would be a greater priority.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
So only do one funded by the revolving account, so not one funded by the town's general fund.
Correct.
Okay.
Final item I had before going to public comment was I had the decision tree on here. I personally don't think we should talk any more about it until the very least.
I got into it. That's what I was doing, Jason, when I was saying, okay, what else is going to be considered to make the decision once we know what the demographics say, if it looks like it's a go.
Yeah.
So
I think we should be ready for that conversation next meeting, subject to obviously the update on the Collier discussion. I'll open it for public comment. Seeing none, is there any other business? All right, Roger, I'm going to turn it to you to adjourn your meeting, and then we'll go after you. You're on mute.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess with the two of us, Katura, I would entertain a motion to adjourn from you.
I move to adjourn.
I will second. No discussion, roll call vote. Katura,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
All right, and I'll move that the Capital Planning Committee School Research Subcommittee adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Kathy. Roll call, Cook,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye.
I've
Thanks
started-
all.
And it's 8:32.
Perfect.
All right. Have a nice Thanksgiving.
Thanks,
Thank
you too.
Everybody too, same thing.